In this episode of the Intentional Midlife Mom podcast, I'm sharing another presentation that I gave during my Simplify Your Holiday Season online summit. At the time of this recording and airing, you can still get your free ticket at simplifyyourholidayseason.com. There are 23 presentations there that you can watch for free, but you do have to register at that website that I just gave, also linked in the show notes below. But in this presentation that I'm sharing with you here today on the podcast, we're talking about when the holidays are hard. How do you get through the holidays when it is a hard time for you? Emotions, memories, the loss of loved ones, complicated relationships, so many things can make the holidays hard. And if you're a midlife mom, I'm speaking directly to you right now because I am one of you. And man, managing our emotions is hard enough these days, but then you add the pressure cooker of the holidays and trying to manage our emotions at that time. And I think it takes it to a whole new level. So, whether you are a midlife mom or not, if the holidays are hard, this is going to be an episode for you. Make sure you give it a listen and make sure you're registered for the summit and joining us live for free. Let's jump in and get started.
Well, hey there, my name is Jennifer Roskamp, and I am a certified life coach and homeschool mom of 9 who is passionate about helping women just like you embrace the here and now while also being focused on creating the life you actually want. As a midlife mom in her 40s, about to be a mom in my 50s, I've realized that it's so easy to lose yourself in caring for your family, your home, and all the things. Until one day you realize you're not even sure who you are anymore or what you even want in life. So on this podcast, we're going to work on managing yourself well so that you can manage all of the other things and people well too. So let's dive into what it means to manage your home, your time, your family, and yourself well. This is the Intentional Midlife Mom podcast. Well, hello there. Welcome back to the Simplify Your Holiday Season online summit. I am your host, Jennifer Roskamp, and I am actually going to be giving you this presentation today. So I'm excited to be here with you talking about when the holidays are hard as a mom. And I think this is something that so many of us can relate to. So if you are not new to me, you will not be surprised that I'm going to start off by sharing some truths with you. And if you are new to me, know that truths and mantras, as a life coach, truths and mantras are something that is included in almost everything that I teach. And so what truths do is they kind of they help you and they give us some context. So with what I'm going to be sharing with you, they give you and I an opportunity to kind of, again, have some universal truths that we both understand kind of underlie what we're going to be talking about. And so I've actually got 4 truths for you that you need as a basis before we get into the nitty-gritty about what we're actually going to be talking about. And so beyond that, once we kind of cover these truths, I've got some common things that tend to make the holidays hard. I've got 3 different situations that, again, are common. And so you'll probably be able to relate to at least one of them, maybe all of them. So that's where we're going today. So let's start off with our first truth. So number 1, if you feel like the holidays are hard, the first truth is this: it's okay. You're not a bad person. You're not a bad mom. You're not a bad daughter, a bad friend, etc. because the holidays are hard. So often we feel like we're wrong or we're bad for feeling that way. And that's not to say that we can't work through some of these hard things, because that's what we're going to be talking about here. But there is nothing wrong, because sometimes we feel that situations are hard. Sometimes we're as we are positioned right now, the holidays aren't quite here yet. And so it can be normal, if the holidays are hard, that you feel a little bit of a heaviness about them, or maybe some sort of stress about them, or whatever it is that you're feeling. It's okay to be feeling that. And sometimes a lot of the times we feel like that's wrong, and we feel like we're a bad person for feeling it. And I'm saying we're not. I'm saying it's okay. that the holidays might feel hard to you. That's truth number one. Truth number two, the holidays can be both hard and something else at the same time. They can be both hard and fun. They can be both hard and fulfilling. They can be both hard and memorable. It doesn't have to be an absence of this hard in order for your holidays to also be something else. These two things can coexist. And so the goal isn't necessarily to tell ourselves we can't see them as hard, or we have to ignore the things that make us interpret the holidays as hard or feel like the holidays as hard. They can be both hard and something else at the same time. Truth number three. And this is such a good perspective to have, because sometimes when we're facing a kind of a difficult season or a challenging season, it can feel like it's going to last forever and we just lose perspective. And so truth number three is that the holidays don't last forever. There is an end to the holidays. And again, sometimes it's helpful to just be reminded that there's an end to a season of hard or a season of struggle. And sometimes we just need to be reminded. So this is your reminder that the holidays aren't going to last for forever. There is the other side. We will get beyond them. So that's truth number three. Truth number four is that there very well may be circumstances that make this season hard that you can't change, right? But there is always something that you can change, and that's you. So more on that in a minute. That's where we're going to be going. But again, there is often elements of certain realities, certain things that we have to do during the holidays. You might have to go to certain gatherings that are hard. It might be, you have to fulfill expectations that you'd rather not fulfill. It could be that it's your first it's your first holiday season without someone that you love. And so that's hard, right? And you can't do anything about a fair amount of these circumstances, but there is always something that you can change, and that is you. All right. So again, I'll explain it a little bit more in a minute, but from where we are now, know that again, this is the perfect time to be talking about this, because we can start to prepare now for the emotions. We can start to prepare for the responses that we might choose to have about things. We can choose all kinds of different ways that there's things that we can do to prepare now so that it can be quote unquote better this year than it's ever been. Now is our opportunity to do that. One of the things I talk about a lot is this whole concept of being in the back seat versus being in the driver's seat. And here's what this means. Being in the back seat is where most of us spend the majority of our lives. In fact, we don't even know there's a driver's seat much of the time. What it means to be in the back seat is essentially you're just kind of along for the ride in your life. You are just accepting that things are what they are, and you're just hoping that somehow they get better or different. You're not really playing an active role in your life. If you think about when you're a passenger in the backseat of a car versus when you're driving the car, well, as the driver, you're much more actively involved. You're doing something. You're the one who is doing something. And so it's very similar here. So what it means to be in the driver's seat as it relates to your own life then is that you are playing an active role. You are taking certain actions in order to bring about certain results. You are not accepting things just as is, and you are saying, how can I work with this? How can I work within these limitations? Kind of like I said, how can you feel that the holidays are both hard and something else? Yes, I can't change the fact that the holidays are hard for these specific reasons, but I'm also going to choose to think and feel like the holidays are also memorable. I'm going to enjoy the holidays, even though they're hard. This is what it means to be in the driver's seat. We're not just accepting the one side of the coin. We're not accepting that we just have to sit and allow things to happen while again, we just kind of absorb it. So being in the driver's seat is where you really move from being passive in your life to being active. So that's these three concepts I'm going to be sharing with you, these three circumstances in kind of the step-by-step process that I'm going to give you for each one of these things. Know that it is very much you following what I am saying here is you're climbing out of is how it's kind of the pathway that you're taking to climb out of the back seat and into the driver's seat. Okay. So again, I've got three common things that make the holidays hard. Let's talk about the first one. The first one is difficult relationships or family dynamics. And so that is hard, right? So the idea here is that, again, we want to be proactive and in the driver's seat rather than just dreading that we have these gatherings, we have these get togethers, we have to be in situations, maybe for the only time the entire year during the holidays, where we are having to be in proximity, to be in situations where we are with having to be face to face with difficult relationships or dealing with difficult family dynamics. So how do we then, in this situation, climb out of the backseat and into the driver's seat? Number one, I've got 3 steps for each one of these 3 things. I love threes. Number one is recognize that you can't change another person. Whoever it is that you are in difficult relationships with or have difficult relationships with or family dynamics with, you can't do anything to change the dynamics that that person brings into the situation or the relationship. And so, as much as that is true, the other side of the coin also is then that you don't have to take responsibility for someone else's behaviors either. And sometimes we do that as well. We spend a fair amount of our time trying to control another person, and even if that's not what we're doing, a lot of times we feel like our ability to look at it differently, our ability to feel better in this situation hinges on whether or not another person changes their behavior in some way. I'm not going to feel any better about this unless that person apologizes. If that person doesn't acknowledge what they did to hurt me in some way, I just can't move forward. In those circumstances, how you respond and what you experience is dependent upon what that person does or doesn't do. And so, therefore, you cannot move in that situation. You're not allowing yourself to move towards resolution, to be moving towards feeling better, actually enjoying this gathering or this get together, perhaps, because you can't do that unless this person does this particular thing over here. But it's so freeing when we recognize that we can't change another person. And that therefore also means I don't have to wait until that person does something to feel better in some situation, in some manner, to feel like to have a better experience at this get together. I can choose to do that simply by not hinging how I do or do not experience this gathering on their behavior. I can just base it on how I choose to think about this experience, what I choose to think about this person, how I choose to react and respond to that thing they did a while ago. I can change that anytime they want. It doesn't change what they did, but again, I can change how I interpret it. I can change how I choose to receive that. But the first thing here is to recognize that you can't change another person, and therefore it's never in our best interest to, again, hinge anything about how we're going to experience this particular situation on another person's behavior, because we can't, because chances are they're not going to, and there's nothing we can do to tip the odds in our favor. So recognizing that is step one. Step two, you can decide how deeply someone will impact your emotions, right? And I think as parents, for those of us who are parents, we teach this to our kids all the time, right? When they get mistreated by a friend or maybe they're bullied, right? You can't, again, change the fact that that person is saying or doing those things. It's kind of like the sticks and stones may break my bones, right? And we're good about teaching that to our kids, but we often forget that for ourselves too. And it is true for ourselves too. Someone else's misbehavior doesn't have to ruin your experience. It doesn't have to ruin your day. It doesn't have to spoil the holidays for you or the get together. Just because you have one person in a family gathering of 20 that you have an issue with, you can still choose to enjoy the other 19 because you're just choosing to not internalize whatever the person that you have an issue with is bringing. You don't have to internalize that. And so in that way, you can decide how deeply someone else is going to impact your emotions based on their actions or their words. You can decide how that's going to affect you, how deep it's going to go in. The third thing here is that boundaries are a good thing. Now, boundaries are, there's a whole lot I can say about boundaries, but just to keep it as a high level here, boundaries are when you decide in regards to a difficult situation, a difficult person, a difficult family dynamic, you decide what is permissible for you and what is not. And so essentially, you know your boundary line so that you can recognize when that's crossed. You get to decide how you're internally and externally going to respond when that boundary is crossed. But that's kind of step two. But first, it's kind of determining this is what my boundary is, right? It's when you know your line now before you're in the situation. So you have this opportunity to say, I'm willing to tolerate this certain set of circumstances. But if it gets to this point, that's when I'm no longer tolerating it. That's my boundary line. And now you can also start to think about what are some possible ways that you're going to respond when that boundary does get, if that boundary does get infiltrated. And the past will do a lot here to help, again, kind of guide you. How have things looked in the past? If you think about different interactions in maybe the same gathering or get together, different years, how would you like to have responded? Look at it from in hindsight. Where would you like that boundary to have been? If you replay that in your mind, where would a good boundary have been for you? Because chances are it's going to go somewhat similar this year again. And so where does it make sense to put that boundary? And how, if that is your boundary, again, looking at it from the, kind of looking at the past situation, if we're kind of replaying it in our mind, if that's the boundary, what might some appropriate responses have been in that situation? Because again, that will help you have some of these responses already thought through so that when you're in the situation again, you're not starting from scratch. You've got some idea of how I might react and respond in a way that I actually want to, right? Because we don't want to reactively without, we really want to feel good about the reactions that we have. And so if you are able to right now take the time to think about what would an appropriate response be, you're not relying on yourself to choose that appropriate response in the moment because it's a whole lot harder to do it then. But you then get to decide how you're going to respond when that boundary line is crossed. But it starts with you kind of knowing what that boundary line is. So that's kind of the first thing that can make the holidays hard is when we have these challenging relationships or family dynamics. Situation number two that can be difficult during the holidays is when there's unrealistic or unfair expectations that you've got to go along with to some extent. Because this happens, right? And here are three ways that you can look at that now. And again, remember, we want to be out of the back seat and into the driver's seat here. How do we do that? What would it look like to be in the driver's seat? Because again, there's certain things that you can't control about the expectations that others place on you. You can choose how you're going to respond to that. But again, someone can still place that on you, right? So if you're in a situation where really you know that kind of what's in your best interest is just to kind of go along with this to some extent, maybe to keep the peace, that sort of thing, you can be, here's strategy number one. You can be outwardly quiet and internally honest with yourself. So again, on the outside, maybe you look like you're going along with things that you really internally are not going along with. You can go along on the outside, but be clear on where you stand in the inside. Because it really doesn't matter in certain circumstances, and really in a lot of circumstances, what it might look like you're agreeing to. Just because you look like you're agreeing to or agreeing with someone in a certain way, it doesn't mean that internally you are. Sometimes we have to do those things just to keep the peace. And I feel like the holidays is a time where that is something that we are called upon to do, probably more than any other time of the year. So in reality, you're clear in your own mind that I'm doing this for a certain reason, but it isn't the way that I would choose for it to be. But there is a reason that I am doing it right now. There's a certain reason why I'm doing this. And so sometimes asking yourself, who am I doing this for? And focus on the gift. Keep your focus on the gift you're giving to that person. A lot of times we're accepting certain situations that we, again, just as soon would not. But we're doing it because it's important to someone else. We're doing it because we don't want to bring conflict to someone else. Remember, in this situation, if it applies, Who is that someone else that you're doing it for, and make them your focus? Because when our focus is on, that's right, I'm doing this for my aunt. It's really important to her that everybody is together. And so I'm just going to go with it. I'm going to show up. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to do this, that, or the other thing. And I'm doing it for my aunt. And that's why I'm doing it. That can help us kind of go along with the expectations a little bit more easily when that's our focus. So, strategy number 2 here is to have a conversation where appropriate. Sometimes it can be appropriate to have a conversation to say, sometimes people place what we interpret as unrealistic expectations on us, and they don't even realize it. A lot of times we assume that someone should intentionally understand. Doesn't she understand how hard this is for me? Doesn't she understand that this isn't easy for me to do? Doesn't she understand how busy I already am and she's asking me to bring 3 dishes to pass? Does she not know? The answer might be no, she does not know. So in some cases, when you have these unfair or unrealistic expectations that you're being asked to adhere to, it literally could be appropriate to have a conversation in a very kind, non-confrontational way, just to say, I'm really struggling. I'm really struggling with this year. Here's why. Is it possible that we could make a change in this direction? Or is it possible that I could bring, 2 things instead of 3 this year? I really wish I could bring the 3 dishes that I always bring, but this year it's really bringing some complexities into my life. And I'm just curious, is there a different way that we could do this? Again, sometimes there is just going to be that genuine, wow, I had no idea. Sometimes it's really hard to look at things from another person's perspective, but people are willing to do it. They just don't know how. And they just don't often think about it because they're looking at it from their perspective, just like a lot of times you're looking at it from your perspective. There's a lot of opportunities to have conversations when, for whatever reason, we just don't. And so I'm here to point out, maybe a conversation is a great way to deal with some of these unrealistic or unfair expectations that you're just dreading having to meet. It could be solved with a conversation. And wouldn't that be awesome? The third strategy here is that you can create your own compromises and share them now. Again, we're uniquely positioned with where we are in timing wise with the holidays right now. And so and when someone says, hey, can you bring these 3 dishes to pass? Again, coming up with your own compromises could look something like, oh, I was thinking this year that I was going to bring these 2 really amazing dishes. And I know that, everybody's really going to love these for these reasons or whatever it might be, right? So instead of having a conversation, you're just kind of taking control of the wheel a little bit more and saying, hey, let's try it this way. And you've got plenty of time now to share those and to come up with, if this situation feels unrealistic or unfair to me, what would feel a little bit more realistic? What wouldn't feel unfair and unrealistic to me? What would that look like? And then you're presenting that as an option. It's kind of like sometimes when it's hard for you to be a guest at someone's home for whatever the reason is, sometimes if you just jump in there and say, oh, I'll host this year, that puts, you've got more of the control about how things happen then. So it's that same kind of idea that rather than wait for the opportunity for the complexities to just happen again this year, maybe you could come up with, how could I take some of these complexities? How could I solve or diminish some of these complexities for myself? What would that look like? And present those things now. And again, a lot of times people might be, oh, that's a great idea, right? A lot of times we assume that these types of things aren't going to be well received. And often we can be quite surprised that they aren't received anything like we think. So thinking about that now, how could I take the ball in my court and kind of make it a little bit more the way that I want it to be so that I don't have to get to the point of the unrealistic expectations or unfair expectations being placed on me. It's almost like you're heading them off at the pass first. So that's the third strategy here. And then the third situation that I see can kind of make the holidays hard is because we have to manage our emotions. If managing your emotions during the holidays is hard, this is for you. And so, again, there can be a lot of legitimate reasons why it's hard to manage your emotions. But I think the thing that we can all agree to is we want to be able to manage our emotions in a way that we feel good about. We want to be able to manage our emotions, maybe in a way that's less severe this year by taking some of these actions I'm going to walk you through. So, in order to manage your emotions, I find it's really necessary to process through the emotions. Now, this isn't really so much a three-step process as I've shared with you in the other couple of struggles. This one's a little bit more involved, but it's straight up life coaching, and it's what I love to help women do, because when we can process our emotions are very much the driver of the ship in everything. Whether or not you realize it, whether the actions that you do and do not take are determined greatly, largely, maybe even solely, much of the time, on how you feel about taking that action, how you feel about the outcome of the action, how you feel about what you're going to have to go through in order to take that action. Our feelings play such an active role. And so, this idea of learning to manage your emotions is something that will help you in so many different ways. That's why I love sharing this concept with women, because it's so versatile. It's versatile with what we're talking about now. But again, you'll be able to apply it to all kinds of situations. So, what does it look like to process through emotions? Well, the first step is that you need to identify them. What are they? What are the emotions and feeling that you're having? Is it disappointment? Is it frustration? Is it fear? Is it guilt? Is it shame? Is it blame? Is it sadness? Is it stress? Is it overwhelm? Right? Identifying them. And really, the idea is you just want to dump these all out. You want to get them all out on paper. Just the act of identifying them alone is incredibly freeing. If you've never really called out specific emotions or specific feelings when you know your emotions are all heightened up, if you've never really taken the time to say, what is it that I'm actually feeling? Even that just is therapeutic in and of itself. So identifying them. And by the way, this isn't a process that you just sit down and spend 15 minutes working through. This is something that takes time. And it's probably something where you're going to dump some of these things out that I'm telling you now. And then you'll also come back and dump more out as you think about it more. And a lot of times, as you start to peel the layers of the onion back, again, you'll kind of be looking at those few layers off the onion, and you'll discover some more. And so that's why it's kind of a continual process. This isn't a sit down in one sitting and figure this all out, but it starts with identifying them, name them. What are they? The second step is to allow yourself to feel them for an appropriate amount of time. Now, I'm going to break this into two separate pieces here that we need to focus on. Allow yourself to feel them. What does that mean? Well, basically, a lot of times these hard emotions like shame and disappointment and frustration and sadness, we think that the goal is to just not feel them. Those are bad feelings. I shouldn't feel those, or I need to move away from them as quickly as possible. And it's true that we don't want to wallow in sadness and frustration and shame and blame. And the goal is to be able to move towards something else that is a very healthy goal. But we do need to take the time to actually just feel them for a while, because they are there. And essentially, if we ask ourselves to move away from them too quickly, what we're asking ourselves to do is ignore them. And that's not good. And so giving yourself permission to feel them is not shaming yourself for feeling them. It's not trying to explain to yourself to almost qualify why you're justified in feeling them. None of that. Just feel them. When you identify them and you dump them out, you sit with them for a while. We call this holding space for our feelings. And it's a necessary step in moving through them. And the caution that I will give you is not moving through them too quickly. Take the appropriate amount of time necessary to actually feel them. Well, what does that mean? So now let's look at that second part of what I said. What does that mean? Really, again, the depth, different emotions have different depths at different times. So there is no formula that I can give you for this. What I can say is you are a pretty good judge. You've been having feelings your whole life. You're probably pretty good at knowing what is appropriate and what would be not appropriate, because what we don't want is to wallow. We don't want to spend too long in this down place where it's harder to pull ourselves forward. And so appropriate amount of time, it kind of depends on what the feelings or emotions are, how deeply you feel them. It's a really smart thing to do to just give yourself a deadline. Start there. So maybe you say, I'm going to just sit with these feelings for today, or I'm going to sit with these feelings for 2 days. And after I'm done just sitting with them, then I'm going to move on with the rest of the steps. And again, we call this just kind of holding space for them. But give yourself that deadline. And the idea that is that step number 3 is that when that deadline is up, you turn the corner. You turn the corner. You start to process through, I'm no longer going to feel those things, but if I'm going to be setting those things aside, what am I going to feel instead? That you have to identify as well. So you turn the corner and identify what you're going to replace those negative feelings with, those ones that you're setting aside, and you're going to replace them with these instead. Sometimes an opposite type approach works. So if I'm feeling sadness, I'm going to choose to feel joy. If I'm feeling and I'm setting aside frustration, I'm going to choose to feel in control. That might be a lot of times that can be a really good indicator of what I'm going to choose instead, especially if this is kind of a new concept to you. But you're going to choose the corner and you're going to turn the corner and you're going to choose your replacements. You're going to choose to set those aside and choose to replace them with these things instead. So you turn the corner and you stay on that side of the corner unless, and this brings us to number 4. Sometimes you may need to process through this again. A lot of times feelings are not, we just process them one time. And a lot of times, even within the same context, we're dealing with the same issue. We're remembering we're having the same memories. We have to process the exact same emotions in the exact same context sometimes. So when you turn the corner, it doesn't mean that something's wrong if you start having those feelings again. If you set the frustration aside, you process through them, you turn the corner and you feel more in control instead, but now you're back to feeling frustrated in this situation again, well, that is normal. But when you again identify the frustration, then you repeat the process. You identify again, what is exactly am I feeling? I'm feeling frustrated. Is there anything else in there that you need to identify? What is it you're feeling? And then again, allow yourself to feel that frustration for an appropriate amount of time. Decide on your deadline. Hold space for that frustration. But then you turn the corner and you go back to again, what do I need to feel instead of frustration? And you identify what that is. And those are the feelings you decide to choose, and you choose them and you feel those. And when you start to feel the frustration come again, you say, nope, I'm choosing to feel in control about this situation. I'm choosing to not feel frustrated about this anymore. I'm choosing to feel this instead. And know that it is, you can see how where I started kind of early on with the back seat and the driver's seat, you can see how it's totally different. Back seat would say, I'm feeling frustrated in this situation, and that's kind of all you ever feel. Driver's seat says, I don't want to feel frustrated anymore. Because in reality, usually we don't want to feel those negative things. We need to feel them for a time. That's why we process them. That's why we hold space for them. That's why we allow ourselves to feel them for an appropriate amount of time. But at the end of the day, I don't want to feel frustrated forever. Who does? I want to feel something different. And so then that's a conscious choice. The frustration will probably come back because your brain will give that to you again. But when you notice the frustration is here, I reject that, right? And I'm choosing to feel this instead. So you can see how this is very much a driver's seat place to be. I'm not passively allowing the frustration for longer than I should. And even when you are identifying the frustration and you're holding space for that, know that that is still driver's seat. You are intentionally choosing the frustration at that point because it's a necessary piece in processing the emotions. So know that this is a process that you can get better. This processing of your emotions, it's going to feel kind of wonky. It's going to feel kind of awkward in the beginning. But the more and more you practice processing your emotions, the better and better you can get at them. And kind of the quicker you can move through them. And it feels so good to be processing through your emotions instead of just holding them. So if this is a new concept to you, I am very excited to have given you this information because again, man, I feel so much better when I'm not just carrying these and holding these all the time with nothing else instead. And so once you have this exchange and you know how to make this exchange, it's so different. And your life feels so different in so many ways because if you're not carrying these heavy feelings and instead you're carrying around some of these substitutions, everything feels different in your life. I explain it like the lens through which everything happens in your life has now changed. Instead of it being that lens of frustration, because that's something that you're always carrying, now you've got that lens of feeling in control or whatever it is that you've swapped it out with. And when you approach everyone and everything through this different lens, it helps so much. It changes everything. So often we think that we're compartmentalized and we think that just the way that we feel, this one situation that we're experiencing these feelings of frustration about, it's just this, it fits into this little box of this situation. But in reality, that frustration kind of has a touch point with many, many, many other things that you do. Not necessarily everything, but again, that's the lens. And so everything is just kind of colored that way. And so this really becomes a powerful skill set that I just gave you when it comes to processing through your emotions. So after everything that we've talked about today, where do we start? This is your quick action tip. I want you to, the very first and best thing you can do is just to absorb those truths. I want you just to marinate on those 4 truths that I shared in the beginning, because really your understanding and your acceptance of these as truths is going to be what allows you to work through these 3 other situations in a more productive way. It really has to start with you having buy-in to these truths as I have laid them out to you. So that is your quick action tip. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words all of a sudden. But that is what I had for you today. So if you enjoyed this presentation, make sure that you upgrade your pass to that Summit Superstar All Access Pass so that you will get lifetime and instant access to this session and any of the sessions whenever you want them. All kinds of amazing speaker bonuses, transcripts, cheat sheets, so much goodness comes with that All Access Pass. So make sure that you have grabbed that as well. Until we get to the next session, have an amazing day.